The incoming Biden administration will bring on more than 4,000 appointees. Some of those picks have already come under fire, and not only by Republicans. Liberal activists are taking aim at some of the president-elect Biden's potential cabinet picks and senior aides for their corporate ties. Mr. Biden has repeatedly said he will prove to be more liberal with his economic policies than any other Democratic president. But some progressives have their reservations. They say many former Biden aides are lobbyists, formerly, or advisors to companies that could directly conflict with his political agenda. One of those critics joins me now. Jeff Hauser is an executive director of the Revolving Door Project, who analyzes corporate influence on government for the Liberal Center for Economic and Policy Research. Jeff, good to have you with us. You have been openly critical of cabinet picks with corporate ties and those who have been lobbyists in the past. Do you believe that anyone with that type of resume should be excluded from serving in these roles?
Yes, we think that people who have been committed to the public interest and been working in public interest-oriented fields for several years should be preferred to people who are enabling special interests. Think about lawyers who take their experience in government and then provide secret insights to corporate America so they can figure out a way to avoid investigations. Sally Yates, a potential attorney general, for the last 3+ years, she has been advising clients like Google how they can avoid being investigated effectively by the U.S. Department of Justice. That is not a public interested-minded approach. We would rather to see people like Sherrilyn Ifill, who's the legal director and president of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We want to see public interested-minded people in jobs, or former Senator Doug Jones, or New York Attorney General Letitia James. We want to see people who are public interest-minded get the top jobs in office.
So, Jeff, I get what you're saying, but the argument to that is, of course, that people who serve as public servants, particularly those with remarkable skills, have to do so at a lesser salary than they can otherwise earn in private enterprises. Are you saying that once you try and supplement your family's income by serving in some sort of private capacity, that you can never come back into government?
I would say never in anything in the private sector, but most private sector jobs do not involve selling the knowledge you have of the government to the highest bidder. Most jobs that people have in the private sector in this country have very little to do with the regulatory or law enforcement process or public policy making. But if you are choosing to use your experience in government to make obscene amounts of money outside of government in the private sector, you have chosen to convert your knowledge about the public sector into private gain for yourself. And we think that that is both bad for governance in this country, but also kind of underscores that who are you fighting for? Who will you represent in government? And if you're interested in representing yourself and your past and future clients rather than the public interest, that's not going to benefit the 330 million people in this country. We think that top government salaries, if you're making $175,000 a year, most Americans would consider that a plenty good enough salary. I think the notion that senior government jobs don't pay enough, maybe they should pay a little bit more, but I think that most people would happily live on the salaries that some of these people scoff at. There's an anger at elites in this country. There's a populist anger that cuts across the left, center, and right. And I think it includes people thinking that a salary of $150,000 or $175,000 a year is beneath them.
Well, an article in Politico compares your work to Reagan's work to take the Republican Party further to the right. What do you think of this comparison, trying to bring the Democratic Party more to the left? And do you think that Biden and the Democratic Party is overall too moderate?
I think that there are sets of issues on which the liberal position is controversial, and then there are issues on which the liberal position is deemed common sense and is broadly accepted. Polling shows that corporate officials in senior ranks of government is unpopular among liberals, among centrists, among independents, and even among many Republicans. Also, the fact that you have the Environmental Protection Agency. Should the Environmental Protection Agency rein in corporations that pollute? that is a very popular sentiment. Is that a progressive sentiment? Is that a lefty sentiment that we should rein in dirty water, that we should rein in pollution from the air so that our children can grow up healthy? I mean, yes, in some ways it is a liberal sentiment, but it's also a broadly shared sentiment across the left, center, and right of this country. And so what we are arguing for is that we don't need the head of the EPA to believe in free college for all. We don't need an attorney general who believes in Medicare for all, but we do need an EPA that will clean up the air. We need an attorney general who will send tax cheats, even if they're rich, to jail. We need equal justice under law, and we need people to fulfill the missions that these government agencies have been set out to do. Some people might call that liberal, but we would call that following the law. We want a Department of Labor that fights for working people. We want an Attorney General that fights for equal justice under law. And if you call that lefty, so be it.
So, are you saying though that you reject that comparison, that you're not trying to make the Democratic Party and the incoming Biden administration more liberal rather than really moderate, which the president-elect rather has said that he wants to be a president for all Americans and that he is extending his hand to the Conservative Party and to people who didn't vote for him. Do you think that he needs to be focused more on people who are further on the left rather than trying to bring in people on the right?
I do want the party to shift to the left, but I also want it to do so on the many, many, many issues in which the public support is already there. We think that popular liberal ideas are often much more popular than the Democratic Party. Look at how in the state of Florida, a $15 an hour minimum wage a few years ago, derided as a far left idea, passed with 61% of the vote, while Joe Biden only received 47% of the vote. So we think populist economics is much more popular than the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party's brand has suffered because it has been diluted. It's become too closely tied to corporate America. So what we both want the party to move to the left, but what we are advocating within the executive branch and in terms of appointments and in terms of Biden's cabinet, we are advocating for people who will fulfill the missions of each and every agency. We don't think that is especially lefty, even though we are ourselves lefty. We think that is common sense, that is fulfilling the law. We think it is good politics, and it would be good policy. And if he can show rewards by fighting for workers, fighting for a clean environment, fighting for public safety, fighting against the pandemic, and fighting against corporations that take advantage of people, we think that would be good politics, good policy, and people across the political spectrum would appreciate that sort of high-energy executive branch action.
Jeff, what do you say, though, to critics who believe that Biden's already going to have trouble, particularly when we're looking at the Georgia Senate runoff races and the possibility that Mitch McConnell will still control the Senate, that he will have difficulty getting more liberal cabinet appointees passed through the Senate?
I think, so I'll take the premise, and let's just assume, and I don't actually think this, but let's assume the Republicans win both Georgia Senate seats. First off, I do actually think, for the most part, Biden's picks will be confirmable by the Senate. I don't think Susan Collins of Maine or Lisa Murkowski of Alaska or even Mitt Romney of Utah are going to be seeking to frustrate the president's prerogative if he is to choose qualified people, which he will. I don't think that'll actually be a problem. But let's say it is a problem. Let's say Mitch McConnell successfully does to Janet Yellen for Treasury what he did to Merrick Garland for the Supreme Court in 2016. We believe that there is a Plan B option if Mitch McConnell frustrates our constitutional system. There are options, constitutional, lawful options available to the president, namely the Vacancies Act and the recess appointment power. These are two different ways a president can install people that he chooses lawfully so that they can exercise the power without having received Senate confirmation. This is not preferred. I don't want this to be necessary. But Mitch McConnell should understand, and Joe Biden should understand, that Joe Biden has lawful options in place should Mitch McConnell frustrate Biden's efforts to fill his cabinet and get the government working again.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to ask you straight out. Are there any specific people on the Biden team or who have been or who are under consideration right now that you want taken out of consideration?
We are dead set against the idea of Sally Yates returning as Attorney General. She is a law partner of the Trump Organization's ethics lawyer, and we kind of think Trump Organization ethics is an oxymoron. We think that Sally Yates has been spending the last several years giving really valuable insight to corporate America on how to get away from following the law, understanding how the Justice Department works, how it does not work, and how they can avoid enforcement measures. So we are opposed to Sally Yates. We're also disappointed this week. We've been excited by several picks, but we've been very disappointed to see Tom Vilsack return as Agriculture Secretary. Civil rights groups have been very upset with Tom Vilsack's record for good reason, and he has been a big agriculture lobbyist for the last few years. We think if Democrats are to regain support in rural America and among agricultural communities, we need somebody who will take on big agriculture. So hopefully Tom Vilsack will exceed my very low expectations for his willingness to take on corporate America. But I mean, overall, the picks have not been bad, and they've been better than you might have otherwise expected, given how Biden ran in the primaries. And so we're encouraged by that, but we are hopeful that Sally Yates does not get Attorney General, and we're disappointed in Tom Vilsack.
All right, Jeff Hauser, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.